Hello, my amazing Algebra Half students. This is Mrs. A, and I love math. And today we are in lesson 45 of your blue books, division rule for equations. Now, we have recently talked about the multiplication rule for equations, which basically helps us to solve something like this. When we have a fraction times x, or maybe we have x over 2, which means the same thing, and we're trying to get rid of the 2 so that we can keep the x and find out what it means, we can multiply both sides of the equation by 2, and then this 2 will now cancel that 2, leaving me with an x equals 20. Okay, so x equals 20 is the solution of the original equation, which, remember, I had like this. I had 1/2 x is 10 as my first statement. If I plug in the 20 right here, then I get 1/2 of 20 is 10, and that is true. So we already talked about the fact that we could multiply both sides of an equation by the same non-zero number, and that can help us to isolate or get the x all by itself so that we can solve. Well, today we're going to talk about a division rule for equations, which is very, very similar. Because remember that division by a whole number and multiplication by a fraction can be equivalent. If we're dividing by a number, we say that is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of that number. So wouldn't you agree that 20 divided by 4 is 5, and 1/4 times 20 is 5? They are equivalent, aren't they? So now today we're going to use this rule that we can divide both sides of an equation by the same non-zero number, and we maintain equivalent equations, okay? So it's a good solution method. Now here we have a 4 with our x. So we're going to divide both sides by the same number, never change. We divide by 4, divide by 4. Now these 4s will cancel, and I'm left with x is 3/4. And there's my answer. Down here, I have another one. N times 0.04 is 28. Well, I'm trying to get n by itself. So what if I just divide by 0.04 and over here divide by 0.04? Okay, so now my 0.04 on the top and the bottom will cancel, and I get that n is equal to whatever 28 divided by 0.04 is. Let's check it out real quickly. 28 divided by 0.04. Now what happens when I am dividing by a decimal? Do you remember? I need to take this and go 2 steps over to the right, but then I have to add 2 zeros on the other side, don't I? So it's the same thing as 4 into 2800. So now 4 into 28 is 7, so the answer is 700. So 700 times 0.04 is 28. All right, so we're going to be practicing the division property of equality very soon. All right, now this one we're going to use the division property of equality, but then I'm going to use the multiplication property of equality too, because this one is much easier with multiplication. But we're going to do it with division first. So we're going to divide by what's there, which is 1/3, because we want to get our x by itself. So we have to divide the other side by 1/3 also. Now 1/3 divided by 1/3 is just 1. So we end up with x is equal to 4/5 divided by 1/3. Now x is also equal to, remember, division by a fraction is multiplication by its reciprocal. So we have 4/5 times 3/1. So the answer is 12/5. And remember, we're allowed to have improper fractions now. So 12/5 is the answer. And when we plug it back in, it works back into the equation. Okay, so if I plugged it back in here, and I went back to 1/3, and then I made this 12/5, and I erased this down here, would it be true? So now I have 12 divided by the 4, by the 3 is the 4, and we get 4/5. So it works. Now we're ready to do our practices. That was fast, wasn't it? Okay, now we're going to do our practices, but I'm going to only use the division property here. Right here and here, I'm going to use the multiplication property because multiplying by a fraction is easier than dividing by a fraction. So I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal instead of divide by the fraction. Back in my day, which was many, many, many years ago, they did not separate this property into two separate properties. They didn't call it a multiplication property and a division property. They just called it the multiplication property of equality because it was understood that because division is multiplication by the reciprocal, that they only needed one property for both. So I'm going to treat it all as one property, and this one we will divide, and these two, because it's easier, we're going to multiply. So pause your video. All right, so now we're going to divide by 0.04 and divide by 0.04. But now that gives us x, because these cancel. 28 divided by 0.04 is going to, now I'm not even going to put this in a division. I'm going to move this one 2 to the right. I'm going to move this with 2 zeros. So 2800 divided by 4 is 700. Okay, so now we're going to look at this one. And instead of dividing by 1/3, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of 1/3, which is 3/1. And I must do the same thing on the other side. We must be equal in the way we treat them. So 3 times 1/3 is 1, and I end up with x is, remember I can always put a 1 under any integer. So 15/1 is just 15. And the last practice, hopefully you're getting these right, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of 3/5 to get x by itself. So we're going to multiply by 5/3 and multiply the other side by 5/3. And now these are going to cancel, and we get x is, oh look, nothing's going to cancel at all. 10/9. And there you have it. That is the end of lesson 45. And this is Mrs. A, and may God bless your day.